So this is the second day of my lecture discussing the importance of theory for practice that liberate the mind. Now we are concerned with Buddhism, and Buddhism is not really not a theory, but I have explained yesterday. I mean the theory in the way of Siddhanta, in the way of accomplishing. And the job of Buddhism is the way of accomplishing. Accomplishing what? Accomplishing the liberation from suffering. And liberation from suffering is the aim, or should be the aim. It does not mean it is, but should be the aim of all theories that have to do with Buddhism. Because Buddhism is the logic of awakening. And the logic of awakening is very wide. So the subject matter of study of Buddhism is also very wide. Now, yesterday we have also explained that as opposed to the Western religions, which are based on revelation from God, the Buddhism is based on understanding of the mind. Buddhism is the wisdom which teaches that we are bound by the mind and we can... So we are concerned with the importance of theory for practice that liberates the mind. And we have explained that Buddhism is not a theory in what we consider in ordinary sense. It is a guidance for practice. And in this guidance, actually, it is the mind itself which is our map. In order to explore such a complex thing like a mind, we need a map. Otherwise, we will be groping in an unknown territory. So, the theory is like a map which shows us a way, but when we find the way, we don't need the map. Actually, the wisdom of Buddhism is based on what we call anupashyana. That means the pure observation. Pure observation is the synonym of wisdom, synonym of awareness. And finally, it is due to the lack of objective observation, lack of awareness, that we are bound in suffering. And it is with increasing of awareness based on theory and practice that leads to liberation, that the quality of our life improves and suffering becomes less and less. So this is finally what is Buddhism about. So in order to understand the mind, we have to go, so to say, beyond the mind, because our mind is a mind which is bound. And the mind of a Buddha, no matter of a disciple Buddha or the Buddha for himself or the Supreme Buddha, Supreme Awakened Being, is a mind free from bondage. So how do we get the mind of Buddha? By understanding the nature of our bondage. By understanding the nature of our bondage, we can eliminate the bondage. If we don't understand the nature of our bondage, we have no means to eliminate our bondage. This is very important to understand. So please pay attention to it. So Buddhism is, if Buddhism is a theory, and for many of us who study Buddhism is just another theory, then it is not a real Buddhism. It is not a practice that leads to liberation. It is not a map that leads to liberation. It becomes just another theory. And of course we need theories to learn worldly things. But ultimately we do not need any theory to learn the nature of the mind. We need awareness. And awareness, when it becomes pure, does not need any guidance. But we will not find way to a pure awareness unless we have some direction how to go there, how to get there. And this is a job of Buddhism, the logic of awakening, to give this direction. That is a genuine Buddhism. Now, because Buddhism is based on the experience of the Buddha, and when we are Buddhists, we believe that this experience is the objective nature of the world. Does not need anyone to preach it. If there is Buddha to preach it or not Buddha to preach it, if you are a Buddhist, you believe what Buddha has experienced is the objective nature of our experience. Objective nature of our experience means the objective nature of the mind and objective nature of the world that the mind experiences. Because without the world, there is no mind. And our mind is what actually stores the experience of the world. That's where our mind dwells. So we have to understand the nature of this experience to understand ourselves and understand the world. And the nature of this experience is a process, and the process is impermanence. And we don't see this process because we are lazy, we have no interest, we have a wrong theory, a wrong teacher which does not teach about the nature of our experience, rather teaching something to go beyond this experience than to analyze it as it really is. So no one can jump beyond himself. No one can jump beyond his mind. It is impossible. And because we are studying Buddhism, Buddhism is based on dependent origination, when we know everything in our worldly experience to be dependent origination, we also know what is possible and what is not possible. And what is possible and what is not possible for what? For mind and body. This is the only reality that we have. We have no other reality. Through mind and body we experience the world. Body is the dwelling of the mind, just like the world is the dwelling of the sentient beings. So, in some way or another, the experience of the all sentient beings and of all the worlds are in a very interesting way stored in our mind, which decides, according to this experience, how to act. The act in Buddhism means karma. And in our mind is we experiencing the karma of our experience of the world, of experience of the beings in the world. This is the magic of the mind. We do not need to have supernatural powers to know what is suffering for us, what is suffering for other beings. We don't know to have any special powers to know what is happiness for others, what is happiness for us. We do not know, we do not need to know what is a base for happiness or what is a base for suffering of beings. The base being finally the mind. And this mind then acts according to the karma which has been stored in it. Karma means the accumulation of the samskaras. Samskara means putting things together. In Chinese, they translate as xing, which means to act, go. So we act, we go, we behave in accordance to how we have stored in our mind the acts of our body, of our speech, and of our mind. So, to understand the right theory of practice that leads to, that liberates the mind, we have to understand the mind. Now, yesterday we have explained that we act in accordance how we use the mind. This is very important to understand. Now, we have also explained, and it is very important to understand, that Buddhist scriptures, the agamas, the scriptures concerned with the Bodhisattva way, the Mahayana scriptures, so-called, the Vaipulya scriptures, they don't explain in detail. So, we cannot explain Buddhism in detail unless we have some knowledge of the Abhidharma. I give you, for example, an example. Buddha has taught dependent origination. From the ignorance come the formations, will formations. From will formations come the mind. From the mind comes mentality and corporality and so on. but from what ignorance, what formations, what mind, what body, and what mentality. For that you will have to go to Abhidharma. You will never, nowhere find in the scriptures themselves, in the agamas themselves. This is a job of Abhidharma. Now, the Abhidharma based on the agamas, on the scriptures which explain basically the way how to become an arahat, free from defilements, and with the body of liberation. Arahat, as opposed to us, has a body of liberation. He has the 5 aggregates of liberation, and we beings, we have the 5 aggregates of clinging. That's why we are not arahats. So arahats, he has the 5 aggregates of liberation, liberation based on Shila. We can translate Shila by discipline, but it is not discipline, really. It is not a forced discipline, it is the management of the senses. That is the essence of Shila. Then the aggregate of liberation of mind, which is concentration, and the aggregate of liberation by wisdom, that is the non-differentiating wisdom, which comes from seeing directly the object of liberation. Due to that, he has the body of liberation and the body of knowledge of liberation. No more causes and conditions to be born again. Now the agamas are concerned how to get these 5 bodies. This is the job of agamas. And we get them by correct differentiation. Correct differentiation is the essence of the teaching of the agamas. Through correct differentiation, we go into emptiness, beyond differentiation. Now, the early scriptures of Buddhism emphasize that wisdom. The pragya or poje is that wisdom, how to differentiate correctly. When we differentiate correctly, we will understand in detail the nature of our experience in the world. When we understand in detail our experience in the world, we can go beyond the bondage of the world. Because we understand the mind and its objects. We understand the structure of the mind and how the structure of the mind experiences the reality. In the very popular book in Southern Buddhism, in Theravada, the Milinda Panha, the great Greek king Milinda asks the Arahat Sanghasena, what is the greatness of Buddha? Why is Buddha such a great man? And it is a very, very, very good question. we should know. And the Arahat Sangasena answered, the Buddha, he in one mind, he could differentiate all the different mental factors in a wholesome mind, healthy mind, unwholesome mind, in a liberated mind. All the mental factors which make the content of our worldly experience. Now the king, he is not very clear about the meaning, because this is not easy to understand. We usually think the mind is just one thing. So he explains. The king eats curry. Yes, I do. Can you differentiate all the different ingredients in your curry? And in the curry of the king, they used to grind the jewels and many, many spices from all around India. Of course, very difficult. So similarly, Buddha, in one mind, he could differentiate in detail each and every mental factor, describe exactly its function, its characteristic, its manifestation, its cause of arising. Oh, can you explain any further? Suppose the king goes into the Bay of Bengal and takes water from the Ganga river. Can you differentiate in this Ganga river what is the water of the Gogara, of the Yamuna, and of all the countless streams that flow into the great Ganga river? Of course not. Similarly, Buddha, in one mind, he could differentiate the characteristics, the function, the manifestation of all the mental factors which make the content of the mind, their causes, and explain the objects that these different contents of the mind see. So the emphasis of the early Buddhist Abhidharma is here. Then we all should know at least little bit about the Buddhist history. The Buddhism made another revolution, Pragya Paramita revolution. Buddha himself was a revolutionary. He rejected all teachings, all theories of his time. They did not satisfy him. He did not find them good enough to be theory for practice that liberates the mind. So he learned the science of yoga, which is basically the science of samadhi. And still he was not satisfied, because he found that the samadhi with an object can liberate the mind only temporarily. So he practiced austerities for 6 years and realized how to attain the genuine knowledge of the mind and of the object that the mind experiences. He penetrated the dependent origination, which defines experience of the self and of the beings and of the world and of the body. Now the Abhidharma systems based on Agama, they have elaborated this experience based on the differentiation of the corporeality and mentality. And many systems arose. Then comes another revolution which sweeps all this away, the revolution of transcendental wisdom. What the Buddha has realized is transcendental wisdom. All liberations of the mind are based on the transcendental wisdom. No matter whether liberation of the disciples, liberation of the bodhisattvas, without the transcendental wisdom, we cannot go beyond suffering. Impossible. And transcendental wisdom is the non-differentiating wisdom. So the emphasis has shifted from the differentiated wisdom to the non-differentiated wisdom. But the differentiating wisdom does not mean it is not important. But this differentiating wisdom was studied rather by theories than by meditative practice. And the early system of Abhidharma, they are not what they are taught today as just theories. They were actually the experiences of the yogis in investigating the mind and its object. This is very important. This should be understood. And this experience is indeed very valid. Even so, it has to be finally, when we attain liberation of the mind, it can be all brushed away. But when we have a map to study, it is much more easy than when we have no map. And these systems of Abhidharma, actually the Agamas, same like the Mahayana teachings, don't have a very clear explanation of any system. They're just ideas as they crop. There are, of course, exceptions. Also in the Agamas we will find Abhidharmic Agamas explaining more systematic the nature of our experience. Similarly, in the Mahayana scriptures, we find Mahayana scriptures explaining systematically the nature of our experience. Now, we are concerned with this study of the mind, because the study of the mind and what the mind experiences decides how we actually experience ourselves, our fellow beings, our society and our world. All depends on how we make the objects in the mind. So, how we experience ourselves and the world in all system of Abhidharma that you will find. Now we have only 3, so to say, surviving systems of Abhidharma: Theravada, Sarvastivada, and the Yogacara. We cannot, strictly speaking, establish Madhyamika, Chung Kwan as a system. So these systems, they give you a map how to study the mind and its objects. And finally, they teach the same thing. To understand that all that we experience is a process. And because we don't understand it so we don't cling. What we cling to is not the reality, but it is our concepts of the reality, based on the names. So finally, the aim of all the maps that Abhidharma has created to explain the nature of our experience in the world aim at the same thing: to get us a thorough systematic knowledge of our base, which is the mind, and of what we experience through this base, which is our body and the world and the fellow beings. So the mystery of Abhidharma and of different Abhidharma systems is actually that they should not be considered as just theories. They should be experienced as generations of experiences of the yogis, which have been then by specially talented persons then compiled and preserved until present day. So nowadays, when you study Abhidharma or Abhidhamma, you just study almost mechanically. There are so and so many different minds, there are so and so many different mental factors, there are so and so many different forms of corporality, of rupa, and the dependent relation between them, which is the essence of dependent relation. So we study more or less mechanically. Then the students make exams, learning mechanically. The teacher will ask how many wholesome mental factors are there, how many unwholesome mental factors are there. And so the student will write down and he will get his mark. But this is not how the ancients have studied. The Abhidharma, same, you will find Abhidharma Kosha, you will find in Visuddhimagga, you will find in Yogacara Bhumi Shastra. The teachers refer to the Purva Acharya, to the old teachers who have had such and such experience. And such experience is the valid means of knowledge, because according to Indian philosophy, the Samadhi is the valid means of knowledge. To investigate the mind and to investigate the object that the mind experiences, actually we need Samadhi. If we don't have a Samadhi, what we will experience will be just our mechanical thinking, nothing else. But when there is samadhi, what will happen? The mind will have balance. When the mind has balance, it can see things objectively. If the mind has no balance, if the faculties are not balanced, we only see our own differentiations. When we have samadhi, we also see our own differentiations, but we understand them as differentiations. When we don't have samadhi, we don't understand them as images of differentiation, and we cling to them. So we create different theories which we always change, because the theories and the names are not reality. But this is not Buddhism. This is not the logic of awakening. Actually, it only can prevent the logic of awakening. So how to come to the logic of awakening? First, cultivate samadhi. It does not mean we study history. It does not mean that the scholarly approach to Buddhism is altogether wrong. We are products of history. Buddhism also has developed in history. Its ideas have changed in history. The Buddhism of the Buddha and the Buddhism of what is being today practiced in Tibet, China, Sri Lanka is very, very different from the Buddhism practiced by Buddha and his disciples. Everybody knows it, but still it is a Buddhism what we now practice. Because the essential ideas are the same. All the phenomena are contained in the mind. By mind we are bound, by mind we are liberated. We do not need any higher revelation for that. We do not need any angels to whisper in our ears. It is easy to understand. But it is difficult to accept, because we always want some security, and security comes from a theory, not from reality. The reality is always changing, but the theory does not change, or makes the impression that it does not change. And we are beings because we have fear. If we are beyond fear, we are not beings. And because we have fear, we need something to hold. And that what we hold are our theories. Good theories, bad theories. So first, we need a good theory, if we need any theory at all. Then, on the basis of good theory, we can create a valid map, how to understand our experience. Then, when we have used that map, if we understand Buddhism, we don't need that map anymore. Why? Because we have the science of pure awareness. But the science of pure awareness is extremely difficult because the mind is extremely complex, extremely hard to understand. So we rely rather on theories than on our mind. But what is the nature of Buddhahood? It is explained in all scriptures very clearly. The nature of Buddhahood, no matter whether Buddhahood of the disciples or Buddhahood of the Bodhisattvas, the nature of Buddhahood is the mind without any dwelling. And where does our mind dwell? In our theories, in our fears, in our worries, in our attachments, in our likings and dislikings, in our ideas of the self and what belongs to the self. These are the dwellings of our mind. And we rely on these dwellings of our mind to gauge the reality. But actually very important is to see the reality, not just to raise judgments about it. It must be like this, it must be like that. So how we see the object according to the Abhidharma does not depend only from the object and does not depend only from the mind. It depends from the object, from the mind, and how we make the object in the mind. The making of the object in the mind in Buddhism is called manasikara, which literally, Chinese translate zuo-yi, literally means making in the mind. Making what in the mind? Making the object in the mind. And finally, making the mind itself in the mind, because the mind is the base for the object. If there is not this base, then no object can appear. Object can appear because there is a base. Then we take the sign of that base, the picture of the object, because the object actually we cannot directly grasp. Theravada, the Yogacara, explained the same thing. The things that we hold to or that we don't like are already not there. What is there in the mind is a picture of these things. And you, based on this picture of these things, we differentiate the things according to our likings, dislikings, according to the tendencies of our mind. Now these tendencies of our mind there can be either wholesome or unwholesome. These unwholesome tendencies of the mind, they are called anushaya. Anushaya means the seeds of defilement sleeping in our mind. Now, you may be listening to my discourse, you may have no defilements, no special liking or disliking, no special attachment. You pay attention and try to listen objectively with concentration. But still, these seeds are there, and they will come when the likable object or the object you don't like arise in the horizon of your mind, and they will get hold of your mind and lead it. When you have awareness, you will know. If you don't have awareness, you will be just blindly led and continue to be led. So, how we experience the world depends on the basis, the mind. We just stored our positive tendencies called anushayas, called ashaya. Anushaya are the negative tendencies, ashaya are the positive tendencies. Because this term is difficult to translate, Xuanzang just leaves the Sanskrit term, ashaya. We can also, in Pali tradition, they are called abhinihara. Because we have these positive tendencies, we accumulate the sambara, ziliang, the equipment to realize the theory for practice that liberates the mind. Because finally, all the correct practice starts, according to Buddhism, from the correct view and correct thinking. So finally, everything boils to the wisdom. But the wisdom will not work unless we have yoga. And yoga, Yogacara Bhumi Shastra, Iche Shatilun, analyzes as faith, not a blind faith, but arranging ourselves with the nature of our experience. The desire, because we have arranged ourselves with the nature of our experience, impermanence. So we have desire for liberation. Because we have desire for liberation, we have effort. And because we have effort, we try to find the right means, upaya, to realize the theory for practice that liberates the mind. These are the 4 yogas, which enables the wisdom based on concentration to liberate the mind. Now, the Abhidharma is opposed to the scriptures, Agama, or the Vaipulya, the Mahayana scriptures, tries to define the map of the theory for practice that liberates the mind in detail. You won't find any detailed descriptions, strictly speaking, in the scriptures. You have to turn to Abhidharma. But now what we are mostly not aware of is that this description is based on the way how we put the object into the mind. Because how we experience our corporeality and our mentality depends how we make the object into the mind. That is why in this course I have taught you comparative investigation of the mind. See that you can make to realize the same experience, the experience of impermanence, of suffering based on impermanence, the cause of suffering, and the cause of the and the end of suffering, and the cause of the end of suffering. These teachings, they are in Buddhism, they are called the tathata, the suchness. Whether the Buddha comes or the Buddha not come, this suchness is there. There is impermanence. Impermanence has its cause. There is suffering of impermanence. This suffering of impermanence can have an end if we understand the truth of suffering, because in the truth of suffering the whole Buddhist wisdom is contained. That's why some scriptures, Mahayana scriptures, teach that the truth of suffering is the truth of no suffering. And truth of no suffering is the truth of liberation, and liberation as a cause. If there is no cause, no liberation. And this cause is the pure path, and the pure path is based on pure observation. So now we know that actually our experience, or we should know, and please try to think about it, contemplate it, then Buddhism will have the desired effect. Try to see by yourself. When we make an object in the mind, and we always think by making an object in the mind, when we make an object in the mind, so the nature of reality and the nature of the mind we experience with that reality depends on the way how we attend to the object. When we attend to the object, we engage in the process of cognition. Now the difference between the meditator and non-meditator is that the meditator he penetrates this process of cognition, penetrate its nature by analyzing what the Yogacara Buddhism calls the established truths and non-established truths. Truth is both established, but what is established can be only established on the base of the names we give to the object. If we don't name to the object, we don't establish anything. Now, Yogacara emphasizes this understanding. Whatever we establish in the mind, we establish because we give the name to the picture which the mind has created. Now the Theravada Buddhism, Theravada Abhidharma, Yogacara Abhidharma both explains very clearly what we actually see, the reality that we actually see is a film. Please pay attention to it and see very clearly if it is really so. What the senses immediately reveal to us are just spontaneous pictures which appear and disappear as soon as they are schweier. They are briskly appearing and briskly disappearing. Then the mental consciousness put these pictures of reality that we experience through the five senses together and makes a film, gives it continuity to these pictures, which makes sense. It makes sense for us because we have such and such concepts, but it makes sense for the dogs who have different concepts. It makes sense for the cats, for the birds, for the worms in the earth, for the monkeys. They all have their language, even so they don't speak in a coherent way. But when you listen carefully, you will understand they have also their feelings, and through sounds they explain their very, very vivid feelings, their suffering, their happiness, their despair, their aggressivity. Now, yesterday I have explained that we human beings and the beings in the lower sphere of gods, we are very privileged because as opposed to lower states of life and higher states of life, in lower states of life the suffering is predominant. In the higher states of life, which we normally do not see, the happiness is prevalent because they are purely mind created. So we are in the middle. We have both. We have our fears, we have our worries, we have our aggressivity, but we have also moments of love and compassion. We have moments of clarity. So we are in the middle. And we have the mind which can investigate by creating conditions for investigation, which is the balance. And this balance can only be created when we take the mind itself as the object. When we let the mind observe the mind. Why? Because the contact with the outer object is conducive to a gross kind of touch. And all that we experience when you want to understand Buddhism, all that we experience, all that we can realize is only experienced and realized by touch. Because we have touch, we can sense. Because we can sense, we can conceive, perceive. And because we can sense and perceive, we can differentiate the object. We can link the mind to the object and investigate it. So, what is the job of one who studies Buddhism as it should be studied, as a theory for practice that liberates the mind? To bring balance into his mind. When one has balance in his mind, he can investigate. And he can investigate in detail. And for that, the Abhidharma is very useful. It gives a map, very clear maps, how to investigate in detail. But again, these are only maps. If these maps are taken for reality, problem arises. Many, many maps explaining the highest reality. But the highest reality must be beyond the maps. If you rely on the map, if you rely on concepts, it cannot be the highest reality. But the concepts are very easy, very important to realize the highest reality. This is the nature of our mind, because as soon as we put in it an object, immediately arises the image, and we are then, so to say, investigating the image. The object we are investigating actually is not there anymore. That is why Buddhism teaches there is no self. There is not that which belongs to the self. The self and that belongs to the self is based on actually our likings and dislikings, which are deeply, deeply rooted in our minds. So when we see picture in our mind, we immediately associate it with likings and dislikings, which are as deep in the layers of our mind as the mind itself. They are stored and they are connected with the deep, deep levels of our experience, which don't go just to this life. They contain unimaginable horizons of previous life, of our previous lives, and of the lives of our fellow beings. Because we don't understand this, we have no respect for other fellow beings. Our mind is created in a relation and it cannot be otherwise. In relation to what? In relation, to use the Yogacara philosophy, in relation to our own mind, to the seeds in our mind, which define our reality. On the base of the previous differentiations of the images which form our reality. The five senses impression of the reality is sporadic. Schweier. What the mental consciousness does is put these sporadic impressions together and make a film of reality. And we, so to say, live in this film. The impressions always change, but the mental consciousness put them into series. So whenever image appears, it appears together with a series. So when you pay attention to something, please try to find yourself if it is so or not. When you pay attention to something, you are already, so to say, programmed. You pay attention to something on the base of the evaluation of the pictures in the mind, created into continuous series by your mental consciousness. Actually, the Theravada Abhidhamma and the Yogacara explain the same. Now, how you make these pictures in the mind is explained in a different way. So you have two different ways of making objects in the mind. The Theravada way, which is very interesting and which works indeed and is a valid experience of the yogis that have been experimenting for generations and generations. Same with the Sarvastivada. And you have the experience of the yogis which were compiled in the Yogacara Bhumi Shastra, be it by Maitreya or by Asanga, who describes the way of presenting object to the mind in a very different way. So let us first since we are concerned more this time with Yogacara, let us see how the object is put into the mind in the Yogacara tradition. Now, the peculiarity of the Yogacara tradition, we should know that our experience is based on the alaya. Now, Theravada has the same concept. It calls it the bhavanga. Bhavanga literally means the cause of existence. Consciousness which is the cause of existence. So the meaning is very similar to alaya. Alaya means existence which clings, or mind which clings. Li means stick. It explains our worldly experience, samsaric experience, experience in the process of becoming. Because samsaric experience is the process of becoming. So, because our mind is clinging to what? Clinging to the faculties, clinging to the senses, clinging to what the senses experience, and clinging to the world which is transmitted to us through the senses, and clinging to the mind which has stored our previous experience based on the prapancha, silun, based on the expansion of sensations and of perceptions, based on desire, greed, holding. And based, when there is desire, then there will be resistance. So also based on resistance, which is also desire. We resist because we have desire. So the Buddha has explained the cause of suffering being the thirst, which is desire. And desire for what? Desire to that on which the self is clinging. Desire for the gratification of the clinging. Now, when we view the mind, we will see, experience by yourself, that actually we can have different minds and different sensations at the same time. According to the other systems, Yogacara, Sarvastivada, it is impossible. But what is the purpose of Yogacara? The purpose of Yogacara is to realize the non-dual liberation. That means Buddha's, Supreme Buddha's liberation. Liberation inseparable from the liberation of all the beings. Not individual liberation. This liberation, of course, needs much more investigation, much more awareness, and it needs a very, very, very good base, good order, good yoga. Based on very deep understanding of the non-dual nature of reality. In the non-dual nature of reality, the dualistic seeing as real object and subject is wrong. In the other system it is not wrong. In the system of individual realization it is not wrong. In the path that realizes liberation together with all beings, it is wrong. But what is right and what is wrong, the mind itself decides. On the base of theory for practice that liberates the mind. Now, if you decide that you can have only one sensation and one mind at the time, then of course you will see one sensation and one mind at the time, because you pay attention only to one object. When you concentrate your mind, you will see very clearly it is possible, why not? And our mind is moving so fast, incredibly fast. The speed of the mind is immeasurable. But still, the mind, the worldly mind, is kind of a material mind. In Hong Kong University, they have a laboratory for investigating the mind. You can see it's a mind, it's a vibrations. Vibrations is a material thing. Vibrations in the brain. Now you can see yourself on the screen. When the mind is balanced, the vibrations become different. When the mind is excited, the vibrations become different. You can watch your mind on the screen. But it is still very, very limited observation. And in a way, it is not really exactly valid. Because the mind is an incredible organism. That's why the real mind, which is able to receive all kinds of objects we are not aware of, that mind, very difficult to find. Now, if we make, when we concentrate on one object, with concentrated attention, only one object will be the object of the mind, an object of our mental process. Now, Yogacara proposes another system, another theory for practice that liberates the mind. Just open your mind and see, you meditate, you are able to receive at the same time the maybe painful sensation in your knee or in your shoulder. At the same time, you are able to receive the bliss of the samadhi. According to the Theravada theory, we think it is so because we actually don't understand that when the mind changes the object, it falls into the base of the mind, the bhavanga, then only can change the object. But when you take alaya to be the whole of our experience, which is non-dual, then you don't need to put the object into your mind in this way. You can see, hear, touch, think at the same time. And you can have different sensation at the same time. Alaya, which does not have any clear sensation because its object is not clear, while the object of the bhavanga you can investigate and can become clear if you know the way. So, why not investigate the mind in this way? And it becomes the mind which creates duality. The mind which clings is the mind which creates duality. And if you want a liberation together with all sentient beings, this is a must to work on the basis of this mind. If you want an individual liberation, you don't need this base. Because you rely on the correct differentiation. And this differentiation is correct. But correct only for the worldly evaluation. And correct worldly evaluation is based by fixing objects in the mind. But in the mind, originally nothing is fixed. But fixing objects in the mind actually is the correct way, correct objects. When you fix the correct objects in the mind, you will realize the selflessness, in our experience of the self is a concept. And what belongs to the self is also a concept, not a reality. When you correctly investigate, you will not find anything but concepts. Because you have put these correct concepts in the mind. Therefore, you see in this way. So they are, rather than true realities, they are skillful means for realizing the true reality. This is the difference. The true reality is non-dualistic. And dualism is created by the mind. What mind? The alaya mind. The mind which dwells, the mind which sticks, the mind which is the source of all our negativity. But also it is a mind, when we understand it, it is the same mind which, through penetrating its complexity, we can get non-dualistic liberation. Because through understanding samsara, we understand that which is beyond samsara. In Buddhism, there is no other way. Buddhism, as we have said, is not a religion of revelation. It is a Buddhism. Buddhism is the logic of awakening. Now, this logic of awakening has different aspects, described in the Yogacara Bhumi Shastra in detail. It has the aspect of the worldly reality, it has the aspect of logic, it has the aspect of realization, and it has the aspect of suchness. They are investigated in a different way in the path of the disciples and in a different way in the path of the Bodhisattvas. This is what Yogacara teaches. If you take the objects of correct differentiation, the aggregates, the 18 elements which are called the seeds in the Yogacara system, the 12 bases for perception, the 22 faculties, the dependent origination, the 4 noble truths. If you take these as the highest reality, then your path to the liberation will be on a correct differentiation. But if you understand them as a useful concepts, which we need to penetrate and understand thoroughly, but not as the reality in the highest sense, then you will embark on the non-dualistic path. What is the non-dualistic path? No matter what system of Bodhisattva practice you study, the non-dualistic path means that the differentiation between the subject and the object is produced by the mind itself. Now, when we study Yogacara, they are produced by imposing the name and with it the concepts on our experience of the reality. So, what we experience as reality are the images in the mind. And we evaluate these images in the mind by skillful means of naming. When we name based on the continuity in our mind. A continuity in our mind, again, is based on the differentiation. So that much for today. I see that there are questions coming. There may be more. Huh? Are there more coming, or this is all? Only these? Okay, so let us go to the questions, because some of you may be the students who have attended my course and are very anxious. You should not be anxious. I will not let anyone fail. I just want you to understand. And also we will maybe the date of the examination will be postponed from 19th to the 26th, so that you have more time to prepare, because I have postponed my departure from Hong Kong. So now to the questions. Question 1. How to see the real reality through the constructed reality? How to overcome the influences of constructed reality in our daily life? This is indeed a very good question, and it is very essential to understand. So what is the Buddhist practice? What is a base for all Buddhist practices? No matter whether you study Theravada Buddhism, you study the Chinese Buddhism, you study the Tibetan Buddhism, what is the base for all practices? When you don't have this base, these practices will not work. Mindfulness. If we have no mindfulness, we cannot have awareness. If we cannot use awareness, then all that we do is to reconstruct the reality. Nothing else. Mostly we are just reconstructing the reality on the base of some other form of thinking that we have read about or we have heard about. Or that we have produced by thinking about the theories. So, what does the mindfulness does? What is the job of mindfulness? The English translation of mindfulness is very useful. Actually, it is very different from the original meaning. The original meaning of mindfulness means memory. And this is very significant. Smriti. Actually, when we have an image of reality on the base of which we differentiate reality, this image already is connected with a memory. So we have, when we evaluate such an image, a man, a woman, a car, money, house, and so on, we actually evaluate together with our memories of the similar images and similar reactions stored in the mind. Please try to see clearly if it is so. Now, if we don't have mindfulness, we are not aware of it. We are engaged in this endless prapancha, endless extension of our sensations and perceptions based on our clinging, without even being aware, without even knowing that all this is just a memory. So what does the mindfulness do? We are mindfully putting an object to our mind, and we are extending at the same time the mind. So we are concentrated. While being concentrated by one object, we are not disturbed by other objects. That is mindfulness. Or by not being concentrated on any object in particular, we are not disturbed by objects, because we are mindful. And mindfulness automatically brings concentration to mind. If you are not mindful, you cannot be concentrated. And if you are not concentrated, you cannot be aware. So, all meditation starts with mindfulness. So, when you are mindful, you are also mindful of your process of constructing the reality. If you are not mindful, you are constructing the reality, but not aware that this is what is going on. So the mindfulness leads to awareness, and awareness is what sweeps away the dust from the mind. The mind is covered by many, many layers of the dust. That is why we don't see reality as it is. So in daily life, if we are mindful, then we will not so easily identify with our likings and dislikings, and we will be aware of their coming and going. So a beautiful woman comes and goes, the money comes and goes, the cars come and goes, the beautiful man comes and goes. So the according to Abhidharma, according to Abhidharma Kosha, the essence of mindfulness is wisdom. According to Theravada, the essence of Abhidharma is actually concentration, but they come together. Question number 2. As we live in the modern world, we easily get lost in the wrong view. Illusionary names. How should we contemplate? How can we remind ourselves to be aware of these and to put the Buddhist teaching in practice? Well, this is what we have answered. By mindfulness. Now the nature of mindfulness is slightly different. This we will discuss in the coming lecture. In the theory, again I repeat just theory because all we put in mind is just theories. In the theory of the Bodhisattva practice and in the theory of the practice of the disciples. In the theory of the Bodhisattva practice, you put objects in the mind with the understanding that ultimately no objects can be put in the mind. What you put in the mind is just a name. And this is part of the awareness. You put the body into the mind according to should be. Unfortunately, it is very often not so by many systems of the meditations. Should be based on clear understanding of correct differentiation. You differentiate correctly, but contemplate. Ultimately, no objects can be put into the mind. The real body cannot be put into the mind. The real sensations cannot be put into the mind. The real mind cannot be put into the mind, which differentiates. And what it differentiates is the sensations, and what the sensations receive is the body. And by mind we are defiled, and by mind we become pure. By what mind? By mind that understands the nature of the differentiation, the nature of the pure mind and the defiled mind. So, no matter what theory of Buddhist practice you learn, you should start by learning the mindfulness. Be mindful of the body, nature of the body, but if you practice the non-dual approach, be also mindful that ultimately we cannot reach the body. Be mindful of the sensations, but ultimately we cannot reach the sensation. Be mindful of the mind, but ultimately we cannot reach the mind. And be ultimately of the pure states of mind and impure states of mind, but ultimately the mind is neither pure nor impure. How to practice Schemata, calming of mind, and Vipassana, correct thinking, insight to mind, at the time during meditation? Do they need to happen simultaneously or just switching alternatively in our mind during meditation? So again, depends how you understand meditation. If you understand the meditation in the Yogacara way, you will tend to put from the very beginning the Schemata object in the mind and the Vipassana object in the mind, Schemata object being the non-differentiated image, Vipassana object being the differentiated image, in accordance to your need. But the rule Buddha has set for meditation, only when we have samadhi we can see things as they are. So you still will have to emphasize the practice of getting into the state of balance of the faculties, which is samadhi. In the state of balance of the faculties, you will experience the pliancy of body and the mind. Here, pliancy of body means especially of the mental factors, sensation, perception, will, which experiences a body. We experience a body because of these mental factors. So, in a state of balance of faculties, they will be experienced in a balanced way. Then you can differentiate according to the truth, according to suchness. How to practice shamatha, calming of mind, and vipassana, correct thinking? Okay. So we will talk about it if we have time tomorrow. Because this would need a rather more time for explanation, and we are running out of time. If there are other questions, are there other questions? Okay. I would like to know what the dualistic view really is about. Is it the subjectivity and objectivity? Could you please elaborate on it? Yeah, the dualistic, non-dualistic way of seeing means seeing that the idea of the one who sees and the one and what is seen by the one who sees is a different reality. This is the non-dualistic view, and this non-dualistic, this dualism is created by the mind itself, which is not dualistic. The nature of the mind is not dualistic. The nature of mind is like the space, but mind is not the space, it is a living organism. Nature of mind is like a mirror, but mind is not a mirror, it is a living organism. But it, like a mirror, can receive and reflect all objects, good objects, bad objects, objects it likes, objects it dislikes. Like a space, it can put in all objects. That is a mystery of the mind. Now, when we investigate the mind, we already investigate the mind in terms of the one who sees the objects and what is seen by the one who sees the object. But actually, these are nothing but the aspects of the mind, the aspect of the mental factors and the mind's created by the mental factors, which is the aspect of seeing, in Chinese called Tianfen, and the aspect of what is seen, the images seen by the Tianfen, which are called Xiangfen, the what is revealed by the Tianfen. So you have the Zhuanshi, the active consciousness, and you have the Xianshi, you have the revealing consciousness. And they all base in the so-called self-witnessing aspect of the consciousness, which is the alaya itself. But this self-witnessing aspect of the consciousness is actually a karmic consciousness. That's why it is impermanent. So the Buddhist scriptures teach that the Buddha did not teach it because he was concerned that we, non-enlightened beings, we may mistake it for the self. Okay. Is it possible to see the reality without shamatha meditation? This all depends what you call shamatha meditation. There is a lot of misunderstanding about the shamatha meditation. Shamatha actually is from the Sanskrit root sham, which means to appease. First you have to appease the mind, then you can see, quan. If you have not appeased the mind, you cannot see. Now, in the Agamas, explaining the path to Arahathood, the shamatha, when we explain shamatha, we usually explain the dhyanas. 4 dhyanas in the form of subtle forms, and 4 dhyanas in the formless sphere of perception. Now, as you all know, or should know, as a Buddhist student of Buddhism, the middle path is based on the has to lead to the correct samadhi. When you have a correct view, correct thinking, you will have the correct sila. Then you will have the correct mindfulness, correct mindfulness, correct effort, correct samadhi. Then, when you realize these factors of the middle path, of the Eightfold Noble Path, at the same time, you will cut step by step the defilements, the seeds of the defilements in the mind. Now, the correct samadhi is explained in Abhidhamma as these dhyanas. That's why we very often explain the shamatha as the acquiring of the jhanas. Now, when you study the Yogacara, you will see the practice of shamatha is explained on the 9 abodes of mind in shamatha, which lead to the jhana automatically, or leads to the ability to see things as they really are, but they do not automatically imply the state of jhana, which is a state of absorption of the mind into the object. Be it the worldly object, which is a worldly jhana, like the breath, or the supermundane object, the emptiness, signlessness, and the desirelessness. These objects the mind cannot grasp. The objects that mind can grasp are the worldly objects. And these objects then bring us, so to say, beyond the world. The world is that which we grasp. When we don't grasp, we can go beyond the world. As long as we grasp, we are in the world. But the difference between meditator and non-meditator is that the meditator is fully aware of this grasping and can finally, through his wisdom and understanding, can reduce it to minimum, while still living in the world, not turning away from the world. This is a Bodhisattva practice. Or by turning away from all grasping and go into nirvana. So the shamatha in this tradition is explained as 9 abodes of the mind. First you have to turn the mind inside on the meditation object or on whatever object you take. Then make the mind dwell on this object. Then establish the mind on this object. Then mindfulness will ripen. In the stage when you don't leave the object, you always keep the object in the mind. Then, due to awareness, you can then remove the 5 hindrances from the mind. The sensuality, the anger or resistance, the sloth and torpor, the excitement and worry, and doubt. When you have done it, you have done the shamatha job. Your mind will be balanced. There will be no thinking. There will be no excitement. So you are ready to learn to see things as they really are. And things as they really are is you cannot grasp anything. What you grasp is the picture, the concept in your mind. This is yogacara. Okay, today that much. Now let us transfer merit for the benefit of all sentient beings. 愿以此功德普济一切，我等一众生皆空成佛道。阿弥陀佛。Have a nice day. See you day after tomorrow.